and welcome to our very first short class in a very long course on crisis preparedness. Before I begin, I want to detail exactly what we mean when we say that this crisis preparedness course addresses both acute crisis and long-term instability. Right now, if one were to look around the world, in various places, there is acute crisis. For example, in Los Angeles, there is acute crisis due to the wildfires that have destroyed people's homes and displaced many individuals. That would be an acute crisis. Another example of a recent acute crisis is when Texas's power grid just went down and people were without power for weeks. Another acute crisis from recent memory was Hurricane Helene, hitting the Appalachian Mountains and entirely wiping out some towns. But other acute crises involve protests. One can think back on the BLM movement of 2020 and pandemics. One can think back to COVID. These were acute crisis moments. But we are also dealing with long-term instability. Whether we're looking at the tariffs making certain foods prohibitively expensive or completely inaccessible in someone's area, or climate change making it very, very difficult for certain foods to even be obtained, or climate-related disasters which are happening with increased frequency, there is long-term instability. Additionally, there's long-term political instability. The United States is heading in a dangerous direction. There is an increased Christo-fascist movement that is emboldened and gaining power. That contributes to long-term instability. If one were to look at the ICE raids, they, for example, cause both acute crisis for those who are being targeted and also long-term instability, as many of the people being targeted are the agricultural workers who grow the food for the rest of the nation. So one horrific political action can cause both acute crisis and contribute to long-term instability. This course attempts to prepare people for both. So why would someone take ours when there are so many out there? If you feel a different course would serve you better, then by all means, do it instead. And I'm going to go a step further with this. I personally believe that people should be learning from multiple instructors right now. I think that we need to be learning as broadly and widely as we can. Specifically, I think that we should be learning from fact-checked, peer-reviewed research. I think we should be learning from people who have expertise to offer. I think we should be avoiding misinformation and disinformation and trying to learn from sources that do not lead us down the alt-right pipeline. This course is presented from a non-individualistic perspective. It is all about finding and working with a community. It is all about supporting a community, creating collectives, communes, working with activist groups, and ideally not working alone. In particular, the long-term instability portion of this course is very much geared towards working within the context of a group to make your community more resilient rather than an individual more resilient. This course is not at all intended to teach people how to go have a homestead in the wilderness and stockpile bullets and MREs. It is completely not that. The people teaching this course are all queer, neurodivergent, disabled, and we all belong to marginalized and oppressed communities in other ways as well. We are teaching from the perspective of having communities work together, having people help each other, not from an individualistic mindset. However, we will also be recommending multiple other courses that people can take. There's a reading list that we've put together for people. We have downloads that we are making available to our students of publicly accessible information that we find very useful. We are offering this course through our seminary as well, and the seminarians have been provided with various books and booklets from other sources, other teachers. We have given access to PDFs of riot medicine guides, action medicine guides, street medicine guides from other action collectives and medic collectives that are available and open through Creative Commons. We've provided access to PDFs and ebooks of books that we think would be very useful for this course that are no longer under copyright. They're in the public domain. And we expect our students to learn broadly and widely outside of us specifically. So I really encourage that rather than say, well, who the hell are you to be teaching this class? I should go learn from, a former Green Beret spending 6 months with no shelter. Cool, do that. In fact, I encourage you to do that, and also find your local medic collectives and take their medic training or their street action training. Find your local mutual aid center and see what classes they have on these topics and take them too. In fact, find your mutual aid center anyway and see what classes they offer, because you should be making those community connections anyway. We are going to need our communities. Okay, I think I belabored that point as much as I can. The other question that I do get asked is, well, you all are a witchcraft seminary. What does this have to do with witchcraft? I am not going to take up this entire video ranting on this topic. I will probably make a separate video ranting on this topic and put it under our rant playlist heading. So I'm just going to be brief. Witchcraft is inherently political, and it always has been. Specifically, Sanctum of the Craft is focused primarily on teaching the role of the witch as the adversary. If you look throughout human history, the role that people would look at and label witch in the common English tongue, because that's not the words that were used in those ancient cultures, was often adversarial to those in power, to the state-aligned religious powers, and it was aligned with the common people. Additionally, witch has been used as a pejorative slur and a form of blood libel against marginalized and oppressed communities in order to further disenfranchise them and take away their property and, in some cases, their lives as well. For these reasons, witchcraft is inherently political, and it will continue to be inherently political, especially as the nation that Sanctum operates in right now is going in a very Christo-fascist direction. Project 2025 intends to establish a Christian nation, and by Christian, they do not mean following the teachings of Christ. But why do we feel like any given person should be preparing in this particular fashion? I first started teaching this course in its 1-year-long version. This is now the 2-year-long version. It's expanded in 2014. And I was teaching in person at the time. And just like this course, we started with the history of street medicine, action medicine, protest medicine, crisis medicine, history of using herbalism as a form of activism. We proceeded from there into recognizing misinformation and disinformation, recognizing propaganda. We went from there into prepping a go bag or a run bag, knowing how to evacuate if necessary. We covered how to prepare for protests, how to prepare for riots. We covered basic first aid skills. We took people out into nature and taught them how to purify water, how to identify both medicinal and edible plants in the area, sources of food. We taught self-defense courses. And the covens, temples, circles, and groves around us often responded to this with like, what the hell are you all preparing for? I didn't do a very good job at the time of essentially being like, one, my visions of what's coming keep me awake at night. Like, I wake screaming. I don't know how that's not happening to you. And also, can't you see it coming, visions or no? Don't you see this on the horizon? I didn't do a very good job of explaining that to people. And often felt very discouraged because it seemed as though the vast majority of people said, this isn't something that anyone needs to know. Nobody needs to know this. And then on YouTube, TikTok, there started being a lot of people teaching crisis preparedness courses, but some, not all. There's some good ones, very good ones, ones that I use as sources. Some, not all, of these were part of the alt-right pipeline, and the very people who should be preparing to support their communities were instead preparing to isolate themselves from their communities and go be individualist, extremist bullet hoarders. And people slid away from working with others to survive, to surviving only for themselves. Which brings me to this point. I feel at this point I don't need to explain why a person would want to be prepared and what they're preparing for. It's everywhere. It's in the news every morning. I drive myself crazier reading the news too often. There's just one thing after another. And sometimes it feels irresponsible not to be informed, and other times it feels distinctly damaging to be so informed, and I need to take breaks. So I feel like the answer to that is very evident to people at this point. But why should any particular person prepare? Because the only thing they can control about any of what's happening is themselves. Now, I do not believe that any individual person needs to learn how to do everything in this course. It's actually the opposite. I feel as though this course is meant to support a collective. It was designed originally for the collective I was in. All of this information was designed so that each of us could find our role and stand in it, assisting everyone else. There are some things I feel everyone should know how to do, and others where I feel if someone is too physically disabled to be that person, they should know that, and they shouldn't try to be that. Not everyone is going to be on the front lines in any crisis situation. There need to be people making food. There need to be people comforting the children. There need to be people keeping inventory. There need to be people prepping materials. And in this particular case, my role is primarily teaching. And yes, I am teaching in person as well. But I know that many people do not have access to a mutual aid center or a community center to attend these kinds of classes. So that is why I'm offering this on YouTube. Let's go over the syllabus. So we've already done this first portion where we've introduced the course and explained who the hell we are and why the hell we're teaching this. Next class will be on the history of herbalism as activism. That will probably take 2 or 3 classes. It did the last time I taught this in person. Then we will get into disinformation and misinformation and recognizing them and being prepared to understand how they affect our brains and why it is so easy to fall for it, and techniques that can be used to better resist misinformation and disinformation. Then we will get into InfoSec. Then, because it has been so incredibly relevant, we were going to get into bug out bags a little earlier than I normally do for when I teach this course. We're then going to talk about the place to stand within and how to de-radicalize and intentionally radicalize. I reserve the right to shuffle all this around based on whatever's going on in the United States or the world that week and whatever I feel is super relevant to teach that week, but this is normally the order that I teach this in. We're going to get into the legalities of riot, street, action, and protest medicine. We're going to get into the ethics and the principles and the scopes of the same. We're going to talk about building community for acute crisis. We're going to talk about organizational structures and how to organize. We'll talk about threat modeling for acute crisis and follow that up with de-escalation protocols. We'll explore the importance of consent and care. We'll talk about documentation and how to document and why to document and how to do that with the InfoSec that needs to be preserved. We're going to explore self-care before action, during action, and after action. We'll talk about working with others. We'll talk about how you need to fuel both yourself and your comrades during actions. We will explore the peacemaker principles and recognizing disorganizers and how to spread calm. We'll explore police tactics and what to do if we are arrested, and jail support for others arrested. There will be classes in kitting up for various kinds of acute crises and preparation for extreme weather, cold, hot weather, heavy rains, and flooding. We're going to talk about the importance of self-defense, and we're going to cover some self-defense protocols that we can teach through YouTube. It is very difficult to teach self-defense through YouTube, but we will talk about some of it. We will talk about the pros and cons of different kinds of weapons and self-defense equipment. We'll talk about public health crises and preparation for emergency evacuation. We'll talk about different kinds of emergencies. And then we're going to get into medicine and assessment and evaluation of injured persons. We'll talk about how to keep safe when dealing with people who are bleeding, coughing, sneezing, etc. We will explore trauma and stress and how to help people who are dealing with that during acute crisis. We'll explore injuries caused by heat, cold, by being struck by objects or by people that cause bruises and bleeding. We'll talk about musculoskeletal injuries, head and spine injuries, basic first aid and life support, and also assisting with COP and counter-agent related injuries, respiratory distress, cardiac emergencies, unresponsive states, blood glucose related injury, abdominal issues, menstrual cycles, sexual assault, drug overdose, and more. We will also explore recipes for common herbal medicines for herbal first aid and herbal aftercare. I highly recommend that anyone who is taking this course also consider taking our Masters of Herbalism course. For long-term crisis, which helps prepare for future acute situations and for long-term instability, we will explore different community models and why we don't encourage people to make use of individualistic models. We will talk about different types of community structures, those connected by goal, identity, etc. We'll talk about organizing communities. We'll talk about finances. We'll talk about collective skill sets and why people need to find the role that works for them. We will explore community conflict management, collective ownership, the vulnerabilities that people are preparing to face, personal commitments to acquiring knowledge and putting in the time and sometimes putting in the money. We'll talk about building a local supply network and how to barter. We will explore food, which includes everything from calculating nutritional need and knowing how to store food, and also a bunch of recipes for storing food for long-term crisis without becoming a hoarder of MREs. We'll talk about storing and purifying water, growing a food garden, growing a medicinal garden, what different skill level gardens there are, different models that people can use depending upon their time, their money, the land they have, etc. We'll talk about community garden models as well. We will have some classes about foraging, but this is not the course I teach on foraging. That I always do in person. We will talk about heat and fuel, electricity. We're going to talk about the importance of keeping a library and the different ways of storing it. And we're going to discuss communications, radio, two-way devices, internet, etc. We will discuss preventative medical care, preventative mental health care, hygiene, human and animal waste disposal. We will again discuss weapons. We will also talk about the importance of building community joy through storytelling, music, dance, and holidays, and we will have many, many recipes that we share through this course. Normally, when I teach this course in person, it takes me 2 years to get through all of the information. However, that's with meeting once a week. I'm going to see if I can commit to getting more than once a week of videos up on these topics. I don't know. I'm also teaching this in person. I'm also teaching this live to the seminarians every Monday night at 8:30 p.m. EST. So that is a big time commitment from me since I'm already teaching it to other places. And before anyone asks, yes, the recordings do go up on the Learning Management System and on Patreon of the live version of this course. No, I do not record the live versions that I teach at mutual aid centers or to collectives or communes because it is not safe for their members for me to do so. So I don't. Okay. Whew, that was a lot of information to throw at everyone, but I appreciate it if you stuck around for it. Please remember to like and comment on this video. We reach very few people with our YouTube channel. If our students had not voted that they wanted us to take this information and put it back up on YouTube, I'm not sure that I would have, because sometimes it feels like I'm just screaming into the void. However, if I reach even one person who benefits from our content, then this is worth it. So I'm going to do this. All right. I know that this is getting harder and harder to do, but please be safe out there, everyone.